Hilo warriors of faith, I am not speaking to casual believers today. I am speaking to men and women who know there is more inside them than what has been expressed, more authority than what has been exercised, more fire than what has been released. I am speaking to people who are tired of surviving and are ready to start ruling. People who are done blaming circumstances and are now prepared to discipline their minds for destiny. This is not a comforting word. This is a commanding call to awaken. You cannot live a victorious Christian life with an undisciplined mind. Heaven does not partner with confusion. God does not empower chaos. The quality of your life will always reflect the quality of your thinking, because your mind is the doorway through which God reveals himself or the enemy deceives you. If your mind is blind, your spirit will struggle to walk straight. If your mind is trained wrongly, even divine opportunities will look like attacks. Many believers pray for God to change their situation while God is waiting for them to change their perception. You keep asking God to remove the storm, but God is trying to reveal himself in the storm. You keep crying about the pressure, not realizing that pressure is proof that something valuable is being formed inside you. God is not absent in difficulty. He is hidden there, waiting to be seen by a trained mind. You must understand this truth deeply. God does not shout through miracles alone. He speaks through moments. He does not only reveal himself in answered prayers. He reveals himself in delays, in silence, in closed doors, in painful lessons, and in uncomfortable growth. If your mind is only trained to see God in blessings, you will miss him in correction. If your mind is only trained to see God in comfort, you will curse the very process sent to mature you. Some of you have been offended by God without realizing it. You stop trusting not because he failed, but because he refused to fit into your expectations. But God is not obligated to meet your expectations. He is committed to fulfilling his purpose. And purpose often looks like pain before it looks like promotion. I speak now to warriors of faith who are tired of living on spiritual autopilot, tired of reacting instead of reigning, tired of naming God with their mouth while interpreting life without him in their mind. This is a summons to responsibility because the greatest battleground you will ever face is not around you. It is within you. Your mind is not neutral territory. Every day it is either being trained by truth or shaped by fear, disciplined by purpose or corrupted by distraction. And whether you realize it or not, your life today is the evidence of what your mind has been repeatedly fed. God never designed your mind to be a storage place for trauma, bitterness, insecurity, and anxiety. He designed it to be an instrument of perception, a lens through which heaven is interpreted on earth. When your mind is untrained, you mislabel divine instruction as delay. You misinterpret correction as rejection. You call preparation punishment. You accuse God of silence when he is simply teaching you to listen differently. A trained mind does not panic when circumstances change because it understands that God is not contained in familiarity. A trained mind does not collapse under pressure because it knows pressure is proof of value. Many believers are frustrated not because God is absent, but because their minds are lazy. You want revelation without discipline. You want clarity without consistency. You want authority without accountability. But God does not pour wisdom into careless minds. He entrusts insight to disciplined thinkers. He reveals himself to those who take responsibility for how they process life. You cannot think like a victim and walk like a victor at the same time. You cannot see God clearly while constantly rehearsing disappointment. Your thoughts are either aligning you with purpose or sabotaging your destiny. You were never meant to see God only in church services or worship songs. God is not a weekend experience. He is a constant reality. He is present in routine, present in resistance, present in repetition. He is in the early mornings when obedience feels heavy. He is in the long nights when answers are delayed. He is in the discipline you did not want but needed. The problem is not that God is hiding. The problem is that your mind has been trained to only recognize Him when life is easy, and a mind trained only for comfort will always fail in seasons of construction. Every season of your life is trying to teach you how to see God at a deeper level. Seasons are classrooms, not prisons. But if your mind refuses to learn, you will keep repeating lessons you should have outgrown. Some of you have been in the same emotional cycles for years, not because God is cruel, but because your thinking has refused to evolve. You pray for new doors with an old mindset. You ask for elevation with undeveloped character. You cry for breakthrough while resisting discipline. God will never promote a mind that cannot steward perspective. When you train your mind to see God in everything, you stop asking shallow questions like, "Why is this happening to me?" And you start asking powerful questions like, "What is this producing in me?" You stop begging God to remove obstacles and start thanking Him for developing endurance. You stop measuring life by how it feels and start evaluating it by what it is forming. A trained mind understands that not every uncomfortable season is demonic. Some discomfort is divine strategy. You must be mature enough to accept that God's presence does not always feel good. Sometimes His presence corrects. Sometimes it exposes. Sometimes it dismantles pride. Sometimes it confronts your excuses. If your definition of God's presence is limited to emotional highs, you will reject Him when He comes as discipline. But discipline is proof of sonship. Correction is evidence of care. Silence is often an invitation to maturity. The greatest enemy of spiritual growth is not sin. It is distraction. A distracted mind cannot perceive God even when He is clearly at work. You scroll past revelation. You ignore conviction. You drown discernment in noise. And then you complain that God is not speaking. God has not stopped speaking. You have stopped listening. You have trained your mind to be entertained instead of instructed. But destiny demands focus. Purpose requires attention. You cannot walk in calling while constantly numbing your mind. There is a reason Scripture repeatedly emphasizes renewing the mind. Salvation saves your spirit instantly, but transformation is a process that requires mental cooperation. God will not force you to think correctly. He will provide truth. But you must choose discipline. You must decide what you allow to live rentre in your thoughts. Every repeated thought is building something. It is either constructing faith or reinforcing fear. It is either strengthening obedience or empowering doubt. A warrior of faith does not wait for feelings to align before acting. They train their mind to obey truth even when emotions resist. Emotional intelligence is not being ruled by feelings. It is recognizing them without surrendering authority to them. Many believers are emotionally honest but mentally undisciplined. They feel everything deeply but process nothing correctly. And feelings without discipline become tyrants. When your mind is trained, you stop interpreting delays as denial. You understand timing. You understand process. You understand that preparation often looks like restriction. You stop rushing God. You stop comparing your journey. Comparison is evidence of a mind that has forgotten assignment. When you know why you exist, you stop envying where others are. Purpose silences jealousy. Calling cures insecurity. Seeing God in everything does not mean everything is good. It means God is sovereign. It means nothing is wasted. It means even mistakes can become materials in the hands of a master builder. But this requires humility. Pride resists perspective. Pride wants control, not instruction. Pride wants comfort, not correction. And pride will always block revelation. God often hides his greatest lessons in ordinary moments. If you are always chasing dramatic encounters, you will miss daily obedience. Destiny is not built in moments of excitement. It is formed in seasons of consistency. The mind that sees God in everything understands that faithfulness in small things is training for greater responsibility. There is no shortcut to maturity. You cannot afford to be mentally passive in a world that is aggressively shaping thought patterns. Culture is preaching every day. Media is discipling every hour. If you do not intentionally train your mind, it will be trained for you. And what trains your mind will determine what controls your life. This is not about positive thinking. This is about kingdom thinking. This is about aligning perception with eternal truth. A disciplined mind refuses to rehearse offense. It refuses to nurse wounds. It acknowledges pain without building identity around it. Healing begins when you stop retelling the story of what hurt you and start declaring the truth of who God is shaping you to become. Some of you are loyal to your pain because it has become familiar. But familiarity is not safety. It is often stagnation. When you begin to see God in everything, gratitude replaces complaint. Responsibility replaces blame. Authority replaces fear. You stop waiting for permission to grow. You stop needing constant affirmation. You become internally governed instead of externally controlled. That is maturity. That is spiritual adulthood. Faith is not pretending problems do not exist. Faith is choosing to interpret them through divine perspective. A trained mind does not deny reality. It redefines it according to truth. It understands that visible circumstances are temporary, but invisible purpose is eternal. And what you focus on determines what strengthens. God is raising believers who are mentally resilient, spiritually grounded, emotionally stable, and purpose-driven. Not fragile, not easily offended, not constantly discouraged. Warriors who can stand in pressure without losing identity. Warriors who can walk through uncertainty without surrendering faith. Warriors who understand that God is not obligated to make life easy, but He is committed to making you effective. If you refuse to train your mind, you will keep mislabeling seasons. You will keep sabotaging opportunities. You will keep fighting battles that perception could have avoided. But if you commit to discipline, if you take responsibility for thought patterns, if you choose truth over comfort, you will begin to see God where you never noticed Him before. In conversations, in correction, in closed doors, in waiting rooms, in hidden seasons, in moments that once frustrated you, but now instruct you. And as your perception sharpens, your faith matures, your confidence stabilizes, your obedience deepens, and your life begins to reflect a quiet authority that does not need to shout to be recognized. An unshakable assurance that God is present even when outcomes are unclear. A strength that does not come from control, but from trust. A peace that does not depend on explanations. A mindset that no longer collapses under pressure, but leans into it with understanding, knowing that every moment is either revealing God or preparing you to recognize Him more clearly. And as this discipline becomes habitual, your reactions change, your prayers deepen, your patience strengthens, your discernment sharpens, your walk becomes intentional, your obedience becomes consistent, your faith becomes immovable, your identity becomes rooted, your purpose becomes undeniable, your vision becomes clear, your steps become ordered, your confidence becomes quiet but firm, your resilience becomes evident, your endurance becomes strong, your hope becomes anchored, your mind becomes a sanctuary of truth rather than a battlefield of confusion. And you begin to realize that God was never absent. He was always present, waiting for you to train your mind to see Him in everything. Even here, even now, even in this very moment where your awareness is expanding, and your responsibility is awakening, and your perception is shifting, and your journey is being recalibrated, and your destiny is being aligned, and your inner posture is changing, and your thinking is being confronted, and your excuses are losing power. Your discipline is taking shape, and your faith is rising, and your clarity is increasing, and your courage is stabilizing, and your obedience is maturing, and your trust is deepening, and your perspective is being refined, and your vision is being purified. Your focus is being restored, and your life is beginning to reflect the quiet strength of someone who understands that God is not only found in miracles but in moments, not only in answers but in process, not only in arrival but in becoming, not only in victory but in training, not only in celebration but in construction, not only in elevation but in preparation, not only in clarity but in commitment, not only in revelation, but in responsibility, not only in comfort, but in correction, not only in abundance, but in alignment, not only in breakthroughs, but in discipline, not only in success, but in surrender, not only in power, but in perspective, not only in manifestation, but in mindset, not only in faith declarations, but in daily decisions, not only in spiritual language, but in mental obedience, not only in believing, but in seeing. And as this understanding settles into your spirit and begins to govern your thoughts, you find yourself no longer asking, "Where is God?" but asking, "How is God revealing Himself here?" And that question changes everything. Because once your mind is trained, nothing is meaningless, nothing is wasted, nothing is random, nothing is without purpose. And you begin to walk forward with a steady confidence, not rushing, not panicking, not doubting, but moving with intention, aware that every step is part of a larger design. Every pause is instructional, every challenge is formative, every delay is strategic, every correction is loving, every instruction is timely. Every silence is intentional. Every moment is sacred. Every season is purposeful. Every breath is assigned. Every thought matters. Every decision shapes something. Every response reveals something. Every reaction teaches something. Every discipline produces something. Every surrender unlocks something. Every act of obedience aligns something. Every moment of faith strengthens something. Every choice to see God trains something deeper, something stronger, something more stable, something more resilient, something more grounded, something more powerful, something more eternal, something that cannot be shaken by circumstances, or silenced by uncertainty, or discouraged by delay, or distracted by noise, or corrupted by fear, or controlled by culture, or weakened by comparison, or broken by pressure. Because a trained mind anchored in truth becomes a dwelling place for clarity, and clarity births confidence, and confidence fuels obedience, and obedience releases authority, and authority aligns destiny, And destiny unfolds through disciplined perception. And perception transforms reality. And reality begins to submit to truth. And truth reveals God. And God is seen not just in what happens, but in how you understand what happens. And that understanding begins to govern your life from the inside out. As you continue forward with eyes open, mind disciplined, spirit alert, heart yielded, will submitted, focus sharpened, awareness heightened, responsibility accepted, growth embraced, and faith fully engaged in the process of becoming everything you were created to be. Even as the journey continues unfolding without explanation, without applause, without shortcuts, without guarantees, without comfort, without finality, without conclusion, I speak now to those who have been strong for too long, without being clear, faithful for years, without being fulfilled, disciplined in routine, yet restless in spirit. This is not because God forgot you. It is because clarity is being demanded at a level you have not yet accepted responsibility for. Destiny does not respond to emotion. Destiny responds to alignment. And alignment always begins in the mind. You cannot carry divine responsibility with an undisciplined perception. Heaven does not trust power to people who cannot govern their thoughts. Many believers are sincere but mentally careless. They love God genuinely but think inconsistently. They worship passionately but interpret life inaccurately. And this creates an internal conflict where faith is present but peace is absent. You cannot keep declaring scripture while privately rehearsing fear. You cannot keep praying boldly while internally expecting disappointment. What you consistently expect is what you silently prepare for. And preparation determines manifestation. God will never violate your thinking to fulfill His will. He works with the mind you give Him. That is why transformation is never instant. Salvation is immediate, but maturity is gradual. God saves you in a moment, but He develops you through process. And process always exposes how you think under pressure. Pressure does not create weakness. It reveals it. It exposes untrained areas. It reveals beliefs you never admitted out loud. Some of you call certain seasons attacks when they are actually assessments. God is observing how you respond when things do not make sense. He is watching how you interpret silence. He is paying attention to whether you become bitter or better when outcomes are delayed. You think heaven is impressed by how loudly you worship, but heaven measures how consistently you obey. Noise does not impress God. Alignment does. Seeing God in everything requires courage because it means you can no longer hide behind ignorance. Once your eyes open, responsibility increases. Once perception sharpens, excuses lose power. You can no longer blame people for what your mindset permitted. You can no longer blame seasons for what your discipline refused to correct. Growth begins the moment you stop asking, "Who did this to me?" and start asking, "What is this producing in me?" Many people want prophetic direction but resist personal accountability. They want God to speak clearly, but they do not want to think clearly. They want confirmation, but they ignore instruction. But God does not guide confused minds. He guides submitted ones. Direction is not given to impatience. It is released to stewardship. If you mishandle small insights, you disqualify yourself from greater clarity. Your mind is the filter through which life passes before it reaches your heart. If the filter is damaged, even truth will feel heavy. If the filter is corrupted, even blessings will feel stressful. That is why some people receive miracles and still remain anxious. Their circumstance changed, but their thinking did not. Freedom is never sustained by events. It is sustained by understanding. God does not waste experiences. He wastes nothing, but you can. You waste experiences when you refuse to extract wisdom from them. You waste seasons when you only complain instead of learn. You waste pain when you only cry instead of grow. And wasted seasons always repeat themselves until the lesson is learned. Not because God is cruel, but because He is intentional. Some of you are praying for God to remove people from your life when God is actually asking you to grow past needing them. Not everyone exits because they are evil. Some exit because your capacity must expand. Some relationships expire not because of conflict, but because of calling. And a mature mind understands that loss is sometimes alignment. When your mind is trained, you stop personalizing everything. You stop assuming every closed door is rejection. You stop interpreting every challenge as opposition. You begin to understand that God often closes doors you are emotionally attached to because they cannot contain where He is taking you. And if your identity is tied to access instead of assignment, you will fight God when He tries to move you. There is a difference between faith and fantasy. Faith is grounded in truth and discipline. Fantasy is driven by impatience and emotion. Many believers call their fantasies faith and then accuse God when reality does not comply. But God does not partner with illusions. He partners with obedience. Faith submits to timing. Faith respects process. Faith endures silence without rewriting truth. Your thoughts are seeds. What you plant daily determines what you harvest eventually. A mind that constantly entertains negativity will eventually produce despair. A mind that feeds on truth will eventually produce stability. You cannot plant fear and expect confidence. You cannot water doubt and expect courage. And you cannot neglect discipline and expect authority. Some of you are exhausted not because you are doing too much, but because you are thinking wrongly while doing it. Wrong thinking drains energy. It creates internal resistance. It causes you to fight yourself. Alignment brings rest. Even when the workload increases, peace remains because the mind is settled. God is not trying to make you comfortable. He is trying to make you effective. Comfort avoids challenge. Effectiveness embraces growth. Comfort asks, how do I feel? Effectiveness asks, what is required? Comfort avoids discomfort. Effectiveness understands that discomfort is often the doorway to capacity. Seeing God in everything does not mean you like everything. It means you trust Him in everything. Trust is not emotional agreement. It is disciplined surrender. Trust says, even when I do not understand, I will not abandon truth. Even when outcomes are unclear, I will not compromise obedience. Many believers have spiritual language but carnal perception. They speak heaven but think earth. They declare promises but interpret delays as defeat. But maturity is the ability to hold promise and process at the same time without collapsing emotionally. Immature faith demands instant results. Mature faith endures refinement. God often allows frustration to expose areas where your identity is too attached to outcomes. If your peace disappears when things slow down, your peace was never rooted in God. It was rooted in progress. And progress is a poor God. It cannot sustain your soul. You must stop,